I think we've been conditioned by society too to think that success looks a certain way and should feel a certain way. And I think most of us wake up and we're like, wait a second, the definition of success we've had is not working for us. And I'd much rather figure out what do I really need at my core for an ideal day, an ideal week, and build a business that serves that way of living and that experience of life. That's not necessarily what entrepreneurs typically do, because a lot of where we come from as entrepreneurs, we learn to solve a lot of problems. We learn to try to create a lot of harmony, and then we become reactive. Whatever an entrepreneur thinks is common sense is actually part of that entrepreneur's genius. And they don't document it. It's the infrastructure of the brain and how the brain processes reality.
What you just heard is really the surface of a much deeper conversation. In this episode, Annie Yatch and I get into what reinvention actually looks like when you're building in real time, not as a polished brand story, but through pivots, burnout, blind spots, and learning how to define success on your own terms. We also talk about the difference between building from pressure versus building from purpose, and why so many solopreneurs stay stuck, not because they lack talent, but because they can't see what's right in front of them. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil. My next guest turned down the CIA, launched a restaurant in 7 months, ran a team of retired Navy SEALs, built 3 7-figure businesses, and then walked away from it all. Annie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. What an introduction. Wow, I love that.
Well, what a story. I mean, there are a lot of layers to unpeel there. So let me start with the fact that you went to Georgetown to study counterterrorism and international security. And you were even recruited by the CIA. Now, there's a version of that story where you end up in a very different life. So tell us, was there a moment or a conversation where you realized that path wasn't yours?
There was 100% a conversation when I realized that path was not mine. And it was actually a friend of mine had said, well, listen, if you're going to go down that route, you got to meet a couple of people that are actively in that role. And so he was like, go meet this guy at this restaurant and have a conversation, a real truthful conversation with him. And when I went into this restaurant and I met this gentleman, he basically sort of assessed me. We had a couple of conversations and then he turned to me and I'll never forget this. He goes, you have such a pure heart. He's like, I think that this job would destroy you. He's
Wow.
like, you could do it. You could do it and everyone would love you and you would have a lot of people that you could perhaps help. But he's like, I think the reality of this position would destroy your heart. And at that time, I just remember thinking, I'm so young. I don't want to go down the path of something that could hurt my heart and make me not be who I am. So that was what really was the turning point for me in deciding I don't want to go into, the CIA or the DIA. I want to really focus on how can I bring more benefit to people that are around me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we don't pay. So 2 things that strike me there is when you're young, it's not often you listen to wisdom, right? So, I mean, the fact that you listen to it says something interesting to me. And the second thing is also I think we don't put enough weight on sort of those mentors and those voices that are, I always call them the angels on your shoulders,
Yes.
which sort of help you at those sliding door points or the sort of the junctions of life where you could have gone one way or another. And I think those things are really important, right? To sort of nudge you in the right direction.
So important. And, I was just really blessed that at different times in my career, I mean, I used to work for one of the biggest law firms in Washington, D.C. as well. And I had the chance to go to law school. And I remember sitting there and looking at all the lawyers around me and being like, nobody here seems that happy. Why would I do something that doesn't bring more benefit to the world? And so that's where I decided I actually wasn't going to go to law school as well. So there were things like that came, thank goodness that there were people of wisdom that shared their wisdom with me. And thank goodness I listened.
Yeah, and I mean it's amazing, right? Because and for some people it's okay, right? It's not like it's bad for everyone. It's just I had a similar experience when I, at some point my parents had an opportunity for me to work on Wall Street, and just one day there, and I was like, this is just not me. This is not who I am. This is not what makes me tick. So to your point, right? It's and sometimes you have to sort of go down that road, make the mistake before you realize. So
True.
in some ways, we're lucky. So continuing your story now, so you meet this Navy SEAL who's been badly injured overseas, no sense of purpose. So instead of walking away from that, you basically said, what if we look at everything that made you a great SEAL and built a business around it, right? Now that's a big bet on a big idea. So tell us a little bit about what those early years of actually building that together was like.
Oh my goodness. I got to say, the early years of being an entrepreneur, when you're trying to do something that the world is not quite ready for yet, is very harsh. And so when we started, I remember, like e-learning, remote learning, all that started, but we were like 10 years ahead of it when
Yeah.
it started. And so we had like all these remote learning platforms, all these things we were creating that nobody bought anything from because literally the world wasn't ready for it yet. And so we spent, gosh, I mean, the amount of people we hired or fired or worked with or tried to figure out, it was such a la carte way of doing business that, when you just don't have that entrepreneurial understanding, it becomes very difficult. And what I realized very early on was business only matters based on the relationship you have with somebody. And so I started realizing pretty quickly if I can build a great relationship with someone and show value, then very quickly we can maybe collaborate on something and take it to the next level. But the amount of time, energy, and effort that you waste at the beginning trying to figure out, what is our messaging? What is our offer? What are we putting together? It just, I mean, it was probably 10 years of working our butts off trying to figure out what would actually land. And thankfully, finally, having the chance to work with to basically take all that good knowledge from his brain and backwards engineer it so that we could use it for teams all across the country. That's where everything started to click. And it wasn't actually, Nicole, what you would think. We had a program we ran for kids in middle school that was
Right.
supposed to help the kids be better about bullying and to be more in their own leadership. And what happened was one of the dads, who was a head guy at 3M, saw the program for his fifth grader and called us and was like, "This is the best thing I've ever seen on leadership. Can you bring it to my
Wow.
team?" And that's where everything started taking off in a much different way.
That's amazing, though. But again, see, I think that there's some really valuable lessons here, right? And interestingly, so I'm going to go off on a slightly different path for a second. I heard a podcast with Reed Hastings yesterday, and one of the things he said was, when he did Quickster, he was talking about the big missteps while he was building Netflix. But what stayed with me was not that they made the mistake, but he said it's better to make that mistake early, to be
Yeah.
early to market than to be late. Because catching up is a lot harder, and you still walk away from that failure with lessons, like you said, which you can apply later in smarter ways, right? Because you've already learned what the market hasn't learned yet, right? If you're early. Whereas if
I
you're
mean,
late, you're sort of catching up, and it's a very different point of view. You're coming from behind.
well, I think for us, what we learned was that really because we were remote and doing a lot of things remotely early on, when COVID hit and nobody was remote and we dominated. We were able to bring in so much work with the different teams we worked with because suddenly that all these teams all across the country that had no connection because they're all at different offices, different home environments. So that really worked out well for us, but it was a 10-year lesson.
Yeah. And then a lot of trial and error, as you said, right? And I
A lot
love the pivot too. It's like, and also you have to just keep doing, right? You have to sort of sometimes, and I don't mean like hitting your head against a wall, but as long as you're learning and you're moving forward and you're iterating, you will end up finding the right market for a good solution, right? I do believe that. So now, continuing on your story, as I sort of unpeel these amazing layers, you built 3 businesses, raised 2 kids, then ran a team of 14 coaches across the country, and then you handed it all over, right? Now, from the outside, someone's probably thinking, okay, this is a really successful entrepreneur at the top of her game. So what was actually going on inside at that moment? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I'm very vulnerable about this. I'm very, real with people when I talk about this. You wake up one day and you realize you're running 3 businesses, you have 2 little kids, but you don't ever have time to spend with your spouse, and, you're always taking care of everybody else, but you haven't taken care of yourself, your health, and really, I just began to realize the definition of success wasn't really interesting to me the way people were defining it, right? And I started looking at success very differently, so now my success definition is, I want an optimized environment that I can sustain over time. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna go into, all that grind and hustle and burnout just that I can maybe create a business that might help people or might serve people. I'd much rather figure out what do I really need at my core for an ideal day, an ideal week, and build a business that serves that way of living and that experience of life. That's not necessarily what entrepreneurs typically do because a lot of where we come from as entrepreneurs, we learn to solve a lot of problems. We learn to try to create a lot of harmony, and then we become reactive and we're acting from a place of our trauma rather than from a place of what would make sense in business.
Yeah, no, I love that. And in my mind, that's always been the distinction between a solopreneur and an entrepreneur, right? Because I always say the solopreneur is building the business around their life, not the other way around, right? And I think it's sort of inside. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about that. It was interestingly, I had a guest a couple of weeks ago who said something similar. He said he had extremely successful, sold his company. And he said, I climbed this mountain that I was, trying to get to the peak of. And then I realized it was the wrong mountain when I got to the top. And I think there's so many people who feel that way, and we don't really spend enough time sort of describing success from the inside out, right? It's always from the outside in.
Very,
And what
very true.
people, yeah,
I think we've been conditioned by society too to think that success looks a certain way and should feel a certain way. And I think most of us wake up and we're like, wait a second, the definition of success we've had is not working for us. And I don't think as entrepreneurs, initially when we start a project, because we start when we're a little bit younger, we don't know ourselves as well. We don't necessarily know what is our purpose and what is the focus meant to be. We just think we're here to grind and work really hard and struggle and be in very disciplined mode. But that isn't necessarily what always builds the right pursuit, if that makes sense.
yeah, and also fulfillment, right? That becomes, and like you said, priorities change also, right?
I do.
You know, and not everyone wants to be a unicorn, and that's not a bad thing. You don't
Oh,
have
that's
to be
and
chasing
I
that.
learned early on too, like, I love working one-on-one with people, and I love creating immense change in someone's life, and that doesn't mean that I have to be an influencer, it doesn't mean that I have to be, running calls with, like, 100 people. I love the personalized attention that happens for people's families and their businesses when it can be that one-on-one support, so everybody has something to contribute in this world. You have to figure out what is your purpose first and then build business from that instead of building it from a place of trauma or from a negative fuel. Most people build really big businesses from a place of negative fuel. They're trying to prove themselves, they're trying to create something in the world that they didn't receive when they were young. And when you finally snap out of it and you're like, wait a second, do I really want to build a business that way? It changes the game for you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I don't think people stop to ask the why enough, right? And that's something we don't train people to do. It's always the
Very,
what
very
and the how. Yeah. So
right.
talking about that, interestingly, you said something which I keep thinking about. You said that entrepreneurs are made through trauma. Now you're exhibit A, right? So when did you stop experiencing all of that as something happening to you and start seeing it as something that was building you?
Well, I think for me, it really became I became aware of it when I drove home one night, and I know this sounds a little bit intense, but I drove home one night from working probably a 12, 14-hour day. I remember thinking in my mind, wow, if I could just get a week off in the hospital. Like maybe I could like run my car into this side rail here and get a week off in the hospital. God, that'd be so great to rest. Because
Wow.
young kids, all these things. But I remember thinking that now I would never take action on it. But just that thought in my mind, and I was like, how many other people have this thought as they're building a business? And that was the moment where I'm like, I've got to wake up. This is not the way this is supposed to be. This is not the way this is supposed to feel. I am missing something here. What am I missing? And that was the
Yeah.
first time I ever hired a coach, and I was like, "Tell me all the things I don't know about myself so that I can get out of this phase." Because you end up any time in life when you're not putting your health forward, you're not optimizing your day, you're not making sure that you're in your excellence, you're really not producing something at a level that can truly change the world.
Yeah, true. And also I think we don't understand the idea that there will always be sacrifices, right? And that you have to sort of balance things. You
True.
cannot have all of everything in every sphere of your life. You have to sort of sit down and figure out what are the most important ones and then draw some boundaries around some of the others, right? So you can have it
Correct.
all as long as you define what all is, right? Rather
Exactly.
than
It
chasing
has to
what.
be very intentional, has to be very intentional. But I think at the beginning of most entrepreneurial journeys, most of us are not intentional. We're like, what's going to work? What's going to make money? What's going to get us from here to there? And I think we lose the importance of our purpose and we lose our fulfillment by doing business that way when we start.
Yeah, and maybe, and I don't know the answer to this question, and maybe you just have to go down that path to find yourself, right?
I
And
think you do. I think that's
yeah.
what we're all here to do, right? We have to make a lot of different choices, make some mistakes, and constantly pivot. And then eventually, I think you got to put in a good 5 to 10 years of figuring out who you actually are and what works for you to be able to say, okay, this is what doing in business now, and this is in alignment with who I am.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think you can get that out of a textbook or
No, you
from a
cannot.
wise person, right? You kind of have to be in the trenches and sort of figure that out for yourself, as long as you don't overdo it, right? Like
Correct.
we reach a point where, and that's why I think having people around you is really important. I always say find your tribe because those voices, those
Yeah.
angels on your shoulders are critical on this journey.
That's true. And I think, most of us, I wish that we had hired coaches earlier in the game. You know what I mean? Like really great coaches for ourselves, because that was always the last thing we would think of. Like, well, we can buy this system for the business. We can buy this sales coach. But we never bought, like most people don't want to invest in a coach just for themselves to improve themselves. Now it's getting a lot more widespread and people are much more aware of it because, all the Olympians have coaches. Why wouldn't I? But it was sort of an uphill battle for a while.
Yeah, I've always been amazed by that, right? Because you're right. There's been a massive stigma for a very long time to having a coach. I've had friends who've been coaches for a decade now. And, until 4 or 5 years ago, most of their clients were not willing to share their names as in
True.
testimonials or any sort of proof of, because they were embarrassed to let anyone know they had a coach. And to your point, Tiger Woods always had a mindset coach in addition to a swing coach, right? And so
Yes.
did Roger Federer and yeah, I know. But I'm glad people are sort of recognizing it's not a crutch. It's not a handicap. We,
Essential.
we, we need to get out of our own heads. Yeah.
Well, I always think like the biggest competitive edge any one of us has in business is the way that everything between here works, right? You can be building massive businesses, but you could easily self-sabotage based on a program from when you were 7 years old that you're not even aware of existing. So the way that I think about it is I'm just like, the more we optimize ourselves in our brain and our mindset, the easier business flows. And that's what we're all looking for anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of my favorite golfers, Bobby Jones, once said, and I might mess up this quote a little bit, is the game of golf is won and lost in the 6 square inches between your ears. Yeah. That
100% accurate. I think the
that's
game of life is won or lost.
Absolutely. You're right. Yeah. Everything we do, because this is what either propels us or gives us fuel or holds us back, right? And makes
Very,
us
very.
second guess. So, no, I love that. So, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about brand building and marketing now. Now, you've worn a lot of hats: counterterrorism, defense consulting, Navy SEAL systems,
For
trauma
sure.
work, nervous system regulation. So, when someone asks you what do you find yourself explaining, or is there a thread that connects all of them?
So what I tell most people is that I'm the chief transformation officer for their business. So I'm the missing C-suite that they didn't know they need. And so that's where I come in because everyone's got a fractional CFO, fractional CMO. Well, who's your fractional CTO, right? So that's how I use that because again, transformation for business, transformation personally, transformation for your team, it all comes back to, what do you know about yourself with regards to the patterns in your life and your own leadership? Everything comes back to that true authority. And most people are really hungry to figure out how do I step out of survival authority into true authority.
Yeah, and I imagine that your sort of breadth of experiences actually helps you sell that, right? It becomes a superpower rather than confusion
It
to
definitely
people.
helps. I mean, people could get very confused, right? Because they're like, "Are you a therapist? Are you a
Right.
consultant? Like, are you a business coach? What are you?" I have had those questions earlier on in my career, and now I'm much more clear. I think, and the messaging is more clear because I help high performance entrepreneurs who are literally knowing that there's something greater here for them, but they can't scale and grow the way they used to. They're hitting a revenue barrier, and they don't know why.
Why?
A lot of the people that get stuck at that revenue barrier piece, and they're like, "Oh, I've been making 2 million for 5 years, I can't budge," or "I've been making 10 million for 5 years, I can't budget 20 million." They all end up hopefully at some point finding me, and then they go burst through that revenue barrier, and then the sky's the limit. It's really exciting to witness and be a part of.
Yeah, and you have the track record, right, to prove it. You didn't learn it from a textbook, so I think there's that in your background too. Yeah.
Very
So
true. Very
you just launched Reinvention XO a few months ago, right? After years under North Star leadership. So was there a specific moment when that old name stopped fitting, like putting on an old coat that's suddenly too small? Tell us a little
true.
bit about that.
100%. Well, I think ironically, everyone will probably laugh if they hear this. North Star leadership was started from literally the moment when I had to let go of everything because I was in the middle of a divorce. And so I had a week to turn around and start
Wow.
creating something that would allow me to take care of my kids and allow me to take care of myself and as well as past clients. And so that was built in an instant, and everyone kept laughing because they're like, "You provide so much value. Your website doesn't really share what you do." And I was like, "Well, when I'm 100% clear on exactly the revenue changes that I make for people in business, then I will change the messaging." And so Reinvention XO was more about the fact that in everything in life, we are constantly called to reinvent ourselves. And what I'd like is for people to reinvent themselves to a higher level of who they actually are instead of reinventing to solve a problem that really doesn't need to be solved. So I think in midlife, we all think that there's a crisis that we're about to go through, but really it's this opportunity for us to elevate. And we can't really do it on our own sometimes because we can't see what's in the gap. We can't see what our blind spot is. And that's really why I love the work that I get to do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And also, I mean, I think you're right because, change is the only constant, right? But I love that reinvention is sort of also constant for us. And I don't think there's ever been a better time to be able to reinvent yourself, right? I mean, the access we have is, I think of my father's generation, you sort of had one job and you stayed in that for your whole career.
30
Today,
years.
yeah, but today you can even change fields, right? I mean, we have those abilities today.
Yes.
that, and
With AI.
access.
I'm watching incredible things that people are doing with AI, right? Where they're like, well, now I'm building a twin for myself. And that way my twin can help me with my clients and supporting them. I mean, I did the same thing because I was like, how can we innovate on this to give more value? So I
Yeah.
think exactly right.
And even the channels, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, even a few years ago, who would have been able to launch a media channel with a podcast and like do it from your house and, be able to publish an episode every week? Like you basically have a media network, right? I mean, so the amount of things we have at our disposal too is amazing too. So the other part of that I want to talk about in terms of, the coat being sort of too small is there a version of yourself that you've outgrown, a label that used to fit and now feels like someone else's story? As you go through this reinvention, the latest one?
I think that throughout our entire lives, we grow out of stories, right? And so we grow out of narratives that don't work for us anymore. I think, you know, the earliest one I can remember is I had a very clear story around being a wife and a mother, and I felt like that story held me back a little bit because I felt like I had to do everything to make sure the family environment was safe and, supportive, and I didn't really have a story back then that I was the entrepreneur, right? So I was
Right.
in I that was a massive blind spot of mine, yet the second that everything shifted in the divorce, I had so many people come up to me and they're like, "Well, you're the entrepreneur. I mean, what are you doing next?" And I was like, "What do you mean I'm the entrepreneur?" Because I always assumed that it was my ex-husband, that he was the entrepreneur. They're like, "You built all these companies. You built teams. You had all these incredible people around you. They were all part of your team and they worked because they loved your vision and they loved what you were creating." And so for me, I think going from thinking that I was a wife and a mother and I was someone who didn't know enough to take people where I knew they needed to go, to someone who is so clear in her mission and vision and purpose, and knowing that, like, I am here to help people transform how they think and feel so they have the competitive edge over many other people. That's really what I'm called to do, and I know that now, and I know that I am the entrepreneur. So that was a massive shift for me, going from, "Oh, I'm a mom, I'm supporting my husband, I'm helping build these businesses," to, "No, this is who I am. I'm an entrepreneurial soul, and I'm out here to make the world a much better place."
Yeah, and it's amazing. Again, we sort of go back to that, and I have this saying that I love, which is you can't write the label from inside the bottle, and that's why I always say you need somebody to help pull you out a little bit to kind of show you what you just don't see, right? Because you're absolutely right. You built those three companies, and you had no idea you never thought of yourself as that person, right? You just
Never once.
no, and
But
it
can you
took.
imagine
Yeah,
limiting that is? I mean, if every single one of us has these blind spots that we can't see because our subconscious brain processes 11 million data points a second, our conscious brain only processes 40, there's a lot that is lost in translation that we just don't know about ourselves.
yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's why I always say that, you can get to even 90%, say, being of clarity, but that last 10%, you need that external perspective. There's
Yeah,
no way you can get to that because of proximity. It has nothing to do with intelligence or,
proximity.
not, or being not clever enough to see it. It's just because we're so close to it, we're not going to be able to see it. So, yeah, no, I
Well,
love
I
that.
gotta tell you, I had a client who told me one time, she's like, "Annie, my net worth before I met you was 800 grand." She's like, "Since I've worked with you," she's like, "I'm now making over 5 million." And she's like, "It's because it was the last 6 to 7% that I could never have seen." She's like, "It's not that I didn't have a good life before. I wasn't making good money." She's like, "I was. 800 grand a year is great." But she's like, "The difference when you finally get that last 6%, monumental, changes the game completely."
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I don't think there's a way around that, right? As I said, it's not you can't whiteboard your way into it. You can't brainstorm your way out of it. So
It's
you
very
just
true.
need that
I love
external
you
perspective.
said that. That's so refreshing because most people are just like, "I don't know. I mean, I think I'm pretty optimized," but you know for a fact because 'cause you've been there. Unless you have that
Yeah,
last percent. It's
and
fair.
it's absolutely true in brand building too, because you can't see what you can't see, right? And
Correct.
what and also half the time I always tell people, once you've had a client engagement, sit down and just understand. Not don't get a testimonial. I call it like market intelligence. Understand what worked, what didn't, what were they looking for, what they were disappointed in, because that gives you knowledge that you're not going to have otherwise through an engagement, right? So and
Very
it
true.
helps you with the next one and helps you get better at serving the customers that you're serving. So
We used to call that the debrief, where we'd sit down as a huge team of coaches and we'd go through, how did this go well? How did this go poorly? What can we do differently? And we'd want everybody, no matter if they're the youngest person on the totem pole, the top authority, to share their opinions because that's the way we make everything better.
yeah, absolutely. And I believe companies should do that with employees too, right? Aside from the review,
Yes.
because the review process is a formal nightmare. It's not where you get, it's not a safe space to actually share, honestly. So I don't think that works. But maybe they'll get there,
Well,
or the AI bots will start doing it for us instead.
Well, I always try to do it the companies I worked with because I'm like, we have to weave this in a new way. It's not just a 360 review, right? It's you got to create a culture where people are willing to share and that you get really an honest feedback, which I think some companies are doing much better with these days because everyone's focused on transparency and, bringing in people's opinions in a newer, safer, more psychologically sound way. But it's still evolving, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's even more important for solopreneurs, right? Because we're completely on our own. So I have these angels and truth tellers, as I call them. And,
Yes.
I will tell them everything. And they're the kind of people who care about me. I know everything they say is coming from a position, a place of love uh,
No agenda. They don't have an agenda.
exactly. No
Just
agenda. Absolutely. But you need to hear, I always say they always carry the balloon and give me I mean, they always bring me the pin to burst my balloon when it needs to be burst.
you
And that's
need
really
that. You
important.
need people
Yeah.
that are going to tell you the truth and tell it straight.
So the
Love
other
that.
thing that was interesting to me is you made this deliberate distinction, right? Now this is infrastructure work, not mindset work. So what made you draw that line and how do you get people to understand the difference? Because there's so much noise around mindset.
There's so much noise around mindset. Everyone thinks they understand mindset and they're on top of mindset, but this is an infrastructure process. So, what I learned from working with a lot of entrepreneurs is that we think that our team should just get it, that there should just be common sense, that what we think of as common sense, the whole team should understand. But what I've realized as a coach is that whatever an entrepreneur thinks is common sense is actually part of that entrepreneur's genius, and they don't document it. So, if we're going to be working with entrepreneurs and talking about mindset, it's really not just mindset. That's a small little piece of it. Mindset covers like, okay, some of the conscious thoughts that you have, some of the subconscious thoughts, maybe. But infrastructure is how do all of the narratives and all of the beliefs that you've told yourself build a way of interacting and leading that you're not even aware of? Because for me, it's an infrastructure for how you take every action, have every thought, lead every team or every person. You can't move yourself forward into a totally different level of your own optimization if you don't have this infrastructure built. And with mindset, people are like, oh, it's just a random conversation. Let's talk about how you feel. It's not, it's the infrastructure of the brain and how the brain processes reality.
Yeah, that's really interesting distinction. And I love that because what you're talking about is it's almost like the unwritten signals, right? That we don't pay enough attention to. And
Yes.
someone once told me that, very often your zone of genius is something you think is really like simple or intuitive. And yet everyone is like wowed by it. And you never think twice about like, really? You think that's impressive? Like the things you think are impressive about you are very often not the things other people think they are, right? If that makes
That
sense. But
that is so true. And I see that all the time, right? All the time. I think you're dead on.
yeah, and again, like you said, you need someone else to sort of see that in you, right? Because you can't see that in yourself because those are just sort of natural rhythms, if you like, right? They're not things that you're trying to do differently or learn or explain. So
No, and I've had so many clients over the years too, Sakil, where they'll say to me, I've been in therapy for 30 years. There's nothing you can tell me that I don't know. And I'm always get so excited when they say that because I'm like, well, really, give me half an hour. Let's see. Right. Like I just did this with a lady a couple of weeks ago, and literally she's launching a huge company and she was getting stuck. And I'm like, well, this is why you're getting stuck because of this one thing. And she's like, I've never seen that before. Oh my God, that's so true. But it was so close to her, she couldn't see it. So then now we're shifting how she networks with other people to make sure this one thing doesn't block her. And it's probably going to transform the way she does business. So there's always something that you can't see that's holding you back from your next level of success. And if you don't have anybody to help you find that thing, you're going to stay stuck exactly where you are.
yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And I do believe it's in that last 5 to 10%, right? And
Yes.
and often that is the difference, right, of unlocking everything else. You can have the
100
90% and still be happy. I'm not saying you can't, but
true.
if you want to get to that next level without the burnout, without the extra effort, right? Because
Without all
you're
the
just
extra.
yeah, exactly. So now the other thing which is interesting to me is a lot of your clients or most of your clients come through referrals or private equity partners, right? So have you ever felt like the best kept secret? And does it feel strange to think about marketing Annie the brand to like a cold audience who doesn't know
It
your history yet? Yeah.
It completely does because, it's so nice when you have referrals because that means you're doing a great job. You've helped people's families, you've helped their companies. It's the most beautiful thing when somebody trusts you with that. But I do think It's exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking to think about, okay, now all the group coaching programs are launching, through Reinvention XO, and it's just a different story. But what I've found is the Authority Shift program is very much attractive to women who are business owners. And so I'm getting a lot of great feedback there because they're like, oh my God, you're so confident. You've come back from so much. How did you do it? How do you keep yourself so happy and positive while you're going through all this? I'm like, I'll share all the things I've ever learned. That's the whole point of the program, right? Because like this has been a learning over 15 years and probably 500 to 700 grand worth of time, energy, and effort, and as well as money, right? I'm like, if a woman can learn that in 90 days, it's probably going to be well worth her time. So I've been really excited about that one, but it is intimidating. It is a little bit nerve wracking, to be in front of a cold audience who doesn't know anything about you. But I have loved doing that from being on stages and speaking as well.
Yeah, and it's an interesting shift, right? Because so far you've always sort of had companies, and now suddenly you are the brand, right? And also, like you said, the earlier companies, your husband was the face of the brand, right? Even though you built them behind the scenes, now you are the face, you are the engine, you are sort of like, all of it.
So you got to
So
make sure you're very congruent, right? That's what I've
yeah,
learned. If you are not congruent and if you do not show up exactly with the same energy that you have 24/7, people know and they don't trust you. And
yes.
that's been, I think, the biggest change in my life for 15 years. I've been working towards being as congruent and as clear as possible. Because when people see me, I'm never different. They're always like, you're so nice. I never thought you'd maintain this. I'm like, well, I maintain it because it's exactly who I am.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always say that's the dirty little secret of marketing is be boring. And when I say be boring, I mean consistent.
Consistent.
That is
Mhm.
what, like you said, that is what builds trust. Because if a different Annie or Nikhil shows up every day, it's going to be very hard to trust that person, right? You have no idea who they are. So, yeah,
Also know clearly what the message is, right?
absolutely. Yes. And
So
that people think that it's, they think, and especially in the age of social media, they think they have to be clever and funny and like, every day come up with something brilliant. And I'm like, no, it's exactly the opposite. You have to say the same thing every day
over and over.
consistently over time, and then finally people will really be like, okay, now I know who this person is. And also that's how referrals work, right? Because somebody's putting themselves out there to say I trust this person enough to recommend them to you, so they're putting their reputation on the line, so that says a lot.
Well, I think also the thing I've realized over the years is I've been so thankful for all of the people that I've helped that maybe at the time, I didn't know where it would lead. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I so many things at the beginning at like some sort of a discount or a price point that was a little bit lower. And just that traction of people learning that like I'm about getting the value and making sure that, in less than 30 minutes you have a change that is significant. And I think, for a lot of people out there, when you're in business, you're always thinking about, well, how does this lead to that? And I didn't do that. I did a lot of I'm pouring out my heart. I'm giving people in a way that I wish more people in business would give. And thankfully that's all coming back now as I've been receiving more and more from all the people around me because I've built that reputation of caring more about the impact and the result and the person than I did about maybe the money I was making from it. So
So I'm curious though, because so many people actually say that, right? And I absolutely believe that, right? You have to put the value out there, genuinely help people, and then it will come back to you at some point down the road. But we're in this generation where everything is like, I call it the instant generation, right? Everyone wants results in like 30 days or even a weekend now. So I mean, tell me a little bit about how did you did you believe that initially, or did it take you some time to sort of you know, uh, understand that.
took me some time to understand that. I mean, I've done so much personal development work over the last 15 years. I think the
Yeah.
biggest change for me was I read a book by Tasha Silver called It's Not Your Money. And it's all about the concept that none of the money that moves through you is your money at all. It's a higher power's money. And so if you can get less attached to the money and just pour love into people, the right things are going to come back to you. And I thought it was sort of like, is this really true? But I started doing it all the time. And I'm like, if I show up and I'm in great energy, I pour love into somebody, either they're going to tell someone about me or I'm going to change their life in some way. I had one gentleman, he asked me for a call. He's like, hey, have you ever done a call with somebody where they only pay you $250? I'm like, well, how about right now? Let's do this call. Let's make it happen. And we changed something so significant in his life that he went on to be the CEO of a huge multi-million dollar company. And at the time he was floundering. He didn't know what he was going to do, didn't know where he was going to be. And I was like, that $250 was the most like powerful experience of your life. And he even wrote about it in his book later. He's like, if I hadn't had that call with you, but from my perspective, I don't get to control if it's a 1 hour call with someone or if it's a 6 month commitment. I just have to show up as me and give as much value as I can, and that person's gonna tell me whether they value it or they don't, or if they value it, how much work they wanna do, and that's up to something much higher than me. So I just try to stay very clear on that message as I go through life.
No, I love that. And I've always had this motto where it's like, I help people because I can, not because I want anything in return. And that I
Sure.
think that's the way you do it, right? Because you
Be very
genuinely,
honest.
yeah.
Yep.
And I think that's a good way to be. And I agree with you. And just it takes a while for people to understand that, I think, especially in this sort of hyper growth and hyper reactive and expectation of like, quick turnarounds and instant success culture that we've sort of developed. Um,
It's such an exhausting culture sometimes to
It
watch.
absolutely is. And I genuinely believe everybody, if they're being honest, will tell you they want to get off the hamster wheel, right? I can't imagine anybody, even Gary Vaynerchuk told me he doesn't enjoy it when I met him like, 8 years ago or 9 years ago,
Well,
doing
it's
everything that
happened.
he does. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the
So
entrepreneurs that are out there right now, they don't know how to calm their nervous system, and so we've got that also causing some issues, right? People can't sit still. They can't sit still without being in guilt or judging themselves or thinking, "Oh, I should be doing more." What I'm noticing is a lot more of the entrepreneurs now are being like, "How do I optimize my nervous system so that I'm making decisions from a clear and neutral place?" That used to never be a conversation 5 years ago.
true. Yeah, overstimulation is a problem. I mean, they're saying the medical world is saying that kids are losing their ability to be creative because you're constantly engaging the brain. You're not giving it time and space to actually be creative. So, but I think we're learning. I mean, the cell phone bans are starting to come in. People are, there's a movement now to fight
Very
back
true.
against social media
Yep.
algorithms, right? The way they've been designed.
So
So
thankful for that.
yeah, I know. So I'm talking a little bit of learning and growth. Now, you developed a proprietary framework, the Eagle Protocol, right? So I'm always curious how high level coaches get to that point. How did you know that what you've been doing instinctively had become like a repeatable system?
I think since it's been 15 years, when I started actually looking at the results from different people, I saw some trends and some patterns. But what I really started realizing is for most people to work through to get to a higher level of their own way of thinking, there's a very particular way they have to go about it. Right. And so I don't know how much you know, Nikhil, about the eagle. There's a myth about eagles. Do you mind if I share this myth about
No,
eagles?
please. Yeah.
So I read this a long time ago and it just really resonated with me. There's this concept that when an eagle hits age 40, its beak is brittle, it's not able to go after its prey like it used to, its talons aren't sharp anymore, its feathers are falling out. It basically figures out that I can't survive like this anymore. So the eagle flies to the top of a mountain, it smashes its beak against a rock, it pulls out its talons, pulls out its feathers so that new talons and new feathers can grow. And this is literally what allows the eagle to soar for the next 30 years. So
Wow.
when I read this, it really hit me hard that we hit 40 and many of us think that we're half done with our life. They're like, what else are we going to do? How else are we going to pivot? And in that moment, I was like, the Eagle Protocol was developed because I realized everybody needs to know that we reinvent ourselves at any point of time. And all we need is a better awareness of how our brain works, right? The 6 inches between here to figure out how to reinvent for the highest level of our success so we can soar for the next 30 years. Because nobody wants to hit 40 and not soar.
Sure. And there's no reason not to. I mean, I've got a good friend in my angel network who's starting her new business at 77. So
Amazing.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
I love
awesome. She's
stories like that.
absolutely amazing. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I love that story. I mean, it's like it gave me goosebumps because you're right. And we absolutely can, right? As long as we're aware of the things we need to change and willing to let go of the things that we don't need anymore. That's really important. I always say it's like, you've also got to shed. It's about excavation
Body
to me
shedding,
in terms of
no
building,
shedding.
a personal brand. Yeah. And especially as you move forward. So
Very, very true.
you talk about emotional leakage and nervous system overload. So, is there one simple nervous system audit a solopreneur can do right now to see if they're making decisions out of trauma instead of strategy?
Yes. So for any solopreneur listening, if you go to get into bed at night and your brain is running 100 miles an hour and you can't slow down and you're not sleeping more than 6 hours, typically that's the first indicator that your nervous system needs to be reset. Or if you go to meditate and you sit there and you're like, I can't really do this very well, that would be another indicator nervous system needs to be reset. Now, a lot of people talk about resetting the nervous system with breath work or with somatic body work. But I thankfully met a company about 7 years ago, and they have a way to calm the nervous system by allowing the neurochemistry to be boosted when it comes to serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine. And so I've been working with that company for a little bit to try to help entrepreneurs calm their nervous system very quickly. Because once you do that, the nervous system allows you to build new neural pathways and increases your neuroplasticity. So for me, that was the biggest win ever for an entrepreneur. Because if you think about it, most of us as entrepreneurs, when we start off in this game, we're making decisions based on urgency, false urgency that is created from
True.
a narrative that may not be true. And
Yeah.
so you can calm the nervous system of the entrepreneur or the solopreneur. We have a much better ability to make better decisions in business. I had one gentleman, he was stuck at 24 million in assets. He worked with me for a year on this stuff, and now he's at 50 million in assets simply because his nervous system is so much more calm. He can make decisions from a much more clear and neutral place.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because also I think part of what's happened is our culture's become so reactive, right? That's the other
Very
thing that's happened is we just now we think that speed and time are like the most important things versus slowing down and actually being thoughtful and deliberate, right? Which probably will
yes.
get you where you need to go faster than, doing 100 things at 100 miles an hour and then breaking 80 of them and having to redo like, a bunch of them. So,
You were
yeah,
100% accurate, and I think that that's part of the culture too, right? That's part of the social media aspect, right? Everything is input, constant overstimulation, and there's no way the brain can bring out its creativity, its innovation, and even some of the wins that it would in business if it is in that reactivity mode.
yeah, absolutely. I remember the best piece of advice my father gave me years ago was sleep on it. And I still
Yes,
follow that.
thank goodness, me too.
Yeah.
24 to 40 hours. You
Yeah.
gather more intelligence that way.
And there's science now behind that supports the fact that your brain is clearer the next day and less reactive, less emotional, less
Oh,
clouded, and
even
your
for
judgment.
interactions with your spouse or your significant other, right? Sleep on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
go to sleep and sleep on it.
Yeah, everything. You're right. Like, life and business. I mean, there are a lot of similar overlaps, and obviously there are. We're still the same person, but yes. So
I love
you moved from managing a team of 14 coaches to a solo practice because it was more fun and offered a flexible schedule, as you mentioned up front, right? So what's your best tip for the solopreneur who feels like they have to kill themselves every day to get the deal, but actually wants to scale their impact without the overhead or the massive team, right? Because a lot of people I talk to are like, they became solopreneurs so they don't have to manage teams or, big overheads anymore.
Well, I think, if I think about the biggest tip I would say is like really look at your ideal day and figure out how you want your ideal day to go and then build your business as a solopreneur around that ideal day. Right? Because then you're going to have something that is in true alignment with your purpose. I just think that so many times we don't think about our vision or how we want to experience our day, right? It goes back to that definition of success. What is an optimized daily environment for you that you can sustain over time? And if you go after that first, then the solopreneur journey can be really beautiful.
Yeah, no, I love that. So essentially, waking up happy for a Monday morning, right? Maybe that's
Yes,
the test, right?
I'm always
Versus
happy on Monday mornings, always
me
happy. I get
too.
I'm like, "This is the best. What do we get to do this week?" Everyone
I know.
thinks that I'm, like, a little bit dorky because 'cause they're like, "You are so happy all the time." Like, "When are you sad?" I'm like, "I have moments." I'm like, but I just don't let it, like, really get too involved with what I'm doing for other people, right? What I'm doing for other people is the biggest joy of my life.
Yeah, and we will always have ups and downs, right? I mean that's just part of
Always.
life, and it's just you sort of you walk through those, right? You sort of live. I've become much better at sort of sitting with my discomfort and my disappointment and getting through it and not letting it stall me, right? Which it did in the past. So
Oh my goodness. I mean, in the past, think about how many hours you would spend in that disappointment or discomfort instead of working through it super quick. That's what I tell most entrepreneurs. I'm like, we want to move you from being stuck in a way of thinking that limits you, that could cost you days or even weeks, to getting out of it all in less than 15 minutes. That's always the
yeah.
goal.
Yeah. So linked to that, I'm curious. Now you talked about infrastructure work. I love what you described for the leader behind the business, right? So is there
Mhm.
a personal infrastructure investment you've made? Maybe something that has nothing to do with a tactical business course, but that's actually ended up being your biggest driver of your revenue?
Well, let's see. I think for me, the more I focus on making sure that I'm in an optimized place, that really is what allows the revenue drivers to happen, right? I spend a lot of time in self reflection.
Yeah.
I also spend a lot of time trying to dial in the brand, right? To make sure that the brand is accurate. And so I think that, now that I'm more clear on the brand, I'm more clear on the messaging, I'm more clear on the results that I create for people. It makes it a lot easier to talk to it. And I think now that the world is much more open to coaching and receiving business and life coaching at the same time, it's a much easier conversation. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are sort of my thoughts on it.
No, it absolutely does. And I'm curious though, when you were building those businesses earlier, did you actually self-reflect during that time, or you were just sort of go,
Not at
go,
all.
go?
Nope,
Yeah.
I was go, go, go. I was reactive. I was trying to get all the things done. I had a list every day that I would work myself through. This day and age, what I do is I'll sit in the morning and I call it an emotional deposit, right? So at the beginning of the day, I put a lot of emotional deposits into my system. So I have a lot of capacity for people. Like I used to, in between coaching calls, I used to tap dance in my kitchen and play big band music because I needed something really fun and engaging to keep me innovative, keep me creative, keep me supportive and happy and doing all the things. And so, when you look back on it, you're like, how did I live before? How did I do business before? And I think people can feel when your energy around business is not joyful and exuberant and excited. Like when it's that grind, it's not attractive. It's a lower vibrational frequency that I just don't want to be part of anymore. And I say no to clients all the time because I'm like, the vibrational frequency of where they're at shows me they're not willing to really move. They're not really willing to change. So I think the more you can do things that make you feel alive and weave that into the business experience, and most clients will say to me, they'll be like, Annie, oh my God, I can't take the day off. That'd be ridiculous to take the day off. I'm like, that's exactly what you need to do because you're so in the weeds right now. You don't even know what you want or what you need.
Yeah.
So we have to get out of that reactive mindset and that reactive behavior for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that those little rituals I think are so important, right? We write them off as fluff, but I think that's exactly, to me, they're performance boosters,
They're
right?
all performance
Yeah,
boosters. Everyone used to say to me, they're like, oh gosh, this is so frivolous. I'm like, is it? Not when it
that's right.
supercharges energy for the next hour or two and gives you like incredible joy. I'm like, these superchargers we need in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are lots of things you can fake, but I do not believe that you can fake happiness.
No,
There's
you couldn't.
just no way you can fake that. Yeah, because
No,
people
and I
can
can tell
sense it
you and
immediately.
I you and I have such good, like, energy, and we're so, like, peppy, and we've just got great energy to give to people, and people notice that. It feels different to them. They're like, "Well, I want that. How do I get that?" So it's been 15 years of work to get to this place, to be clear, right? And a lot of investment in myself, but I would never change it.
Yeah, and call us. We'll tell you how to bottle it.
That's right.
So,
Love that.
if we were to grab coffee 3 years from now, Annie, what would you want to have achieved? What's different? What have you built?
I think what I would have wanted to achieve in 3 years from now is I would hope that the group coaching programs have taken off like wildfire so that I could impact thousands and thousands of people. I think that really I'm at a place now where I have a completely packed schedule with all the people I'm helping. The next level is we've got to get this out to more people that are ready to do the work.
To scale. And I love that. So, if you were to offer one piece of advice to someone wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
Oh man, I think I would tell them make sure you have an advisory group of people that are at your level or above your level, hopefully, that you can call on whenever you have a moment of indecisiveness or lack of understanding. Because really, it's that group of like 5 to 10 people that mentor you on this journey that make the biggest difference. So I would say make sure when you start your solopreneur journey, you have at least 5 to 10 people that are at a higher level than you, that you're consistently in connection with and asking questions to.
Yeah, true. And nobody turns that cup of coffee down, right? A chat over a cup of coffee. I mean, it's amazing how people don't ask. Yeah,
I
and I
know.
love
I always asked, at least once I hit a point where I realized, oh my God, relationships are everything. I would just be like, can I pick your brain for a little bit? Can we talk through this? People do it all the time now to me, and I love it. I'm like, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. How can I help? You just don't want people to suffer through like we all used to suffer at the early stages.
No, and we don't have to anymore, right? I mean, the internet, the pandemic sort of opened the second door for us, I think, which is awesome. And
Very,
and
very.
I think it's going to become even more important, the human connection, as AI becomes more prevalent and sort of commoditizes everything, right? I think that's going to become more of a differentiator and more necessary for all of us.
Well,
So
the thing that I've realized too about AI is I've been watching clients of mine interact with it, right? It's very good for certain things, but it acts the same way towards almost everybody, right?
exactly.
That's been so fascinating. It's like, well, like one client will send me, "Oh, I asked AI about these things we talked about on my call." And another client will send, "Oh, I asked AI about these things on the call," and the AI has generated the exact same message for the exact same for totally two totally different people. I'm like, "This is not you. This is not you." I'm like, "But this is AI's version of you." So it's just been fascinating to watch. And I'm hoping that people do stay connected to that customized approach.
Yeah, I think people will recognize the need for it more and value it more. I do believe that. And maybe I'm just an eternal optimist,
Oh,
but
I
we'll
do
see.
too. I do too. I agree.
So, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered?
Well, I think the only thing is if you're wondering as a listener, where is your energy leaking in a place that it shouldn't be so that you can change your solopreneur journey to be a little bit more optimized for yourself, I will give Nikhil the energy leak calculators that you are more than welcome to use it, all of you.
Awesome. We'll add that to the show notes. So that brings us to our rapid fire round. I'm just going to throw 5 fun questions at you.
Okay.
So, when you think about the word reinvention, what's the first image that comes to your mind?
Always an eagle,
I
just
was
because
just
of
going to say,
the story. Yes. Immediately the eagle flying, soaring for 30 years.
and that's in my mind now too. I love that.
Me
What's
too.
one skill from your counterterrorism days that makes you a weirdly better coach?
I would say my ability to assess body language.
Oh, wow. That's a good skill to have.
It is definitely helpful because I can read things in people's body and their mind and their face, how they interact, and even in their energy that I never would have had if I hadn't done that work.
That's wild. It's good for, I'll make a note of that. What's your go-to karaoke song when the pressure's off?
Oh my gosh, probably anything from ABBA. I know that sounds sort of crazy, but I loved Mamma Mia as a little kid, and I just love all musicals. So I don't even know if they do those in karaoke, but I hope they do.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I love ABBA too. So if they made a movie about your life from Georgetown to Park City, what would the title be?
Oh my goodness. Mrs. Smith, probably. Like from Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yes.
Well,
So if you weren't doing this work, what would you be doing, Annie?
oh my goodness. Honestly, I have no idea what I would be doing if I wasn't doing this. I would probably be launching restaurants across the globe with some high-end restaurant group because I have loved food and I'm a huge foodie and that's always been my favorite thing. Loved working with chefs, international chefs. It was just they're so gifted and it's such an incredible talent that they have. So that might be what I would do.
So I sense another reinvention coming a few years down the road once the coaching program
We'll
scales.
see. We will see. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Annie. It's been such a fun conversation. As like you said, the energy has been awesome, and it's been so much fun chatting with you. Thank you so
I've
much for sharing all your wisdom. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me here, Nikhil. I've loved every moment of it.
That conversation with Annie really hit home for me because it challenges so much of the hustle culture we're fed as solopreneurs. Here are my takeaways from our chat. The first is this idea that a lot of solopreneurs are building from reactivity, not intention. And I think that is such an important distinction because from the outside, it can look like ambition, discipline, drive, even success. But underneath it, what's often running the show is urgency, fear, overcompensating, or the need to prove something. Annie lived that firsthand, and that's what makes her so clear eyed about it. And I think she's right. A lot of people aren't actually building the business they want, they're building the business that their stress response built. And that matters because if you build from that place, you can create revenue, momentum, even success by other people's standards, and still have it feel wrong when you get there. So the real question for any solopreneur is not just, how do I grow this? It's also, what kind of life is this business building around me? Because those two things are connected. The second is this: proximity is not clarity. Annie kept coming back to blind spots, and it's true in business, in leadership, and especially in solo brand building. The things that are most valuable about you often feel ordinary to you. The patterns holding you back are usually invisible to you. And the messaging gaps in your business are usually hiding inside what you assume is obvious. It's not that you're not smart enough to see it. It's just that you're standing too close to it. And this is something I talk about constantly with my clients because it is one of the most stubborn myths in the solopreneur world. The idea that because you know your business better than anyone, you can also see it most clearly. But that is exactly backwards. So if you're sitting with messaging that feels a little flat, or positioning that you keep tweaking but never quite lands, or a brand story that is still not fully capturing what you do, the answer is almost never more thinking. It's an outside perspective. The third thing I want to pull out is what Annie said about consistency, because I think it is deeply misunderstood by most solopreneurs. She said that when you're not congruent, when a different version of you shows up depending on the day or the platform, people feel it. And two things break down at once. Trust erodes, and people lose the thread of what you actually stand for. These are two separate problems, and inconsistency creates both. And I could not agree more, because this is where so many solo business owners burn themselves out. They think they need to be clever. They think every post, every email, every piece of content has to be a new idea, a new hook, a new angle, and they exhaust themselves trying to be interesting. But that is not how you build trust. Trust is built through repetition. And the last thing that stayed with me is her definition of success. The flashy version, not the external version, but an optimized environment you can actually sustain over time. I think that is such a useful filter for solopreneurs, because one of the advantages of being a solopreneur is that you do get to choose more intentionally. You do get to build around your life instead of automatically building a machine you have to serve. But that only works if you're honest enough to define what success actually looks like for you. Your energy, your capacity, your pace, your ideal day, your version of impact. Otherwise, you just recreate somebody else's model on a smaller scale and call it freedom. And here's what I've seen with solopreneurs. Most people don't fail because they lack ambition. They fail because they never stopped to define what they were actually building toward. Freedom without intention becomes a different cage, one you built yourself. My challenge to you this week is this. Write down what your ideal day actually looks like. Not your ideal revenue number, your ideal day. When do you start? Who do you work with? What do your energy and attention feel like at 4 p.m.? Then look at your business honestly and ask, is what I'm building moving me toward that day or further away from it? That answer will tell you more about what needs to change than any strategy session or whiteboarding exercise will. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If today's conversation about blind spots and proximity versus clarity made you realize your own brand story is stuck inside the bottle, let's get you that outside perspective. I'm offering a free brand clarity session. We look at your messaging live, find the friction, and you'll walk away with 2 specific pivots you can act on immediately. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind, and remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.